Well, it's 22 minutes before 9. Yesterday, a number of businesses, young professionals and unemployed youth from across the country participated in a webinar to discuss the future employment post-coronavirus pandemic and also, of course, looking at the scenario as the lockdown slowly lifts. And among the topics that were discussed at this webinar were the impact of COVID-19 on ordinary office culture. And joining us now via Skype is Manqoba Zungu, who's the Chief Executive Officer of GetReadySkills organization, who are one of the hosts of the webinar. Thanks so much for speaking to us this morning, Manqoba.
Thank you for having me, Sakina.
So let's start with office culture and how you guys anticipate it will change post-COVID-19.
And thank you for having us once again, Sakina. What we found yesterday in the discussions is that there's a lot of anxiety by professionals. And professionals are wondering how, young professionals, so they're wondering how they're going to basically be able to still prove themselves, still show productivity, still show their managers that they are performing at the right levels whilst being off-site. They are concerned that some of them the places of residence, don't have sufficient infrastructure for them to be able to work productively in their homes. Some of the managers, the more senior professionals, are also concerned because how they've been trained is to manage someone that you can see or that you can see every now and then. Now, if that staff member is working remotely and you don't see that person for 3 months, how do you have the confidence to put your head on the block and say, this person performed in the last financial year? So I think, there's that culture change that's going to be required, and we are moving more towards output-based evaluations as opposed to input-based.
And many people, of course, and I would imagine the people who participated in this webinar would perhaps share similar concerns that this could also be a recipe to prove to employers that perhaps you could get away with and do with fewer employees at this point.
Absolutely. I think a lot of companies are now having to answer the hard questions that, are we operating efficiently? Do we have a lean structure? Do we need all these employees? And those are unfortunately the realities that there will be companies post-COVID or post-lockdown that will go into restructuring processes. So what we were saying to the participants is that, it's important for you to be able to reskill and upskill yourself. I mean, there's a lot of material that's available online, that you can use to upgrade and upskill yourself. So should your company be one of the companies that are restructuring, that you are able to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that you are the employee that should be retained, or should you be affected, you are able to then reskill yourself and repurpose yourself and receive employment in a different space.
Would you say, Manqoba, that perhaps what COVID-19 has done is just accelerated the pace at which we come to that point?
Absolutely. One of the co-panelists or co-hosts with me yesterday is a guy called Stelo Makatini. He runs a company called Linked Pro. And I mean, he's been at the forefront of this gig economy or remote working or freelance working for the last 5 years. So for us, having been in the space for a while, it's not a surprise that now all of a sudden people are realizing that, actually I can have calls via Zoom or Teams or Skype or whatever other tool that is used without me having to incur driving costs, without me having to have the irritation of, the road rage and the traffic. I'm much more productive and much more at ease and able to think more innovatively when I'm sitting at home. So I think now corporates are starting to understand that more and appreciate that more. And now, they're asking themselves the tough questions indeed.
But what are some of the drawbacks of this scenario?
Of course, like in every scenario, there are drawbacks. So there are individuals, professionals that are on the call that are already feeling anxiety from isolation because they stay alone. And this thing of having been, home alone for the last 30 days is just, causing them a lot of anxiety. So there are sort of those drawbacks from an isolation perspective and a depression perspective. There are also obviously drawbacks on the security front, with cybersecurity now being on the rise. So, there are areas that companies will need to look at to make sure that, they are covered from a security perspective and from a culture perspective, that their employees still feel engaged. So now companies have to communicate a lot more frequently, so that the employees still feel part of the business. When someone new joins a business, how do you make sure that they feel part of the organization without you having seen them?
Manqoba, I understand that unemployed youth also participated in this webinar, and I'm really curious to hear what they had to say.
Yeah, they freaked out, Sakina. They're quite freaked out because, with the unemployment rate being so high already, and now the economy is struggling the way it is, and some companies already announcing retrenchments and pay cuts and the like, unemployed youth are really freaked out. And so yesterday we just gave them some tips about how, they can also position themselves, because we gave them a stat that the research shows that only 18% of roles are actually advertised, where there's an advertisement and you send your CV. 82% of the roles are based on referrals. Or, having met someone at a networking function or whatever the case is. So we are giving them some tips about how they can reskill and upskill themselves, how they can, make sure that their social media sells them enough for them to be able to attract people that can invite them to come and interview, and many other examples. But they are very freaked out.
And any other points worth highlighting from that webinar, Manqoba, that we haven't spoken to yet?
Sure. The other concern was around the older generation. They were asking, with now us going more digital, what does it mean for me as a 55-year-old? And again, we said to them, look, it's not the end of the world. Some companies are basically making sure that now there's a tighter focus on talent strategies, and how the older, more experienced employees can transfer skills to the younger guys. Yes, the younger guys probably are more au fait with using technology, but they certainly don't have the experience that the older generation has. So we need to see a lot more collaboration in the workplace between the more experienced and the least experienced professionals.
And perhaps just finally, in your view, what sort of changes do you think should be made to the office environment post-COVID-19?
Come again, Sakina, what?
What sort of changes do you think, drawing on this experience that we are currently going through, what sort of changes should be made to the office environment?
Yeah, I think, there's obviously a few, and it depends on the industry, it depends on the size of the company. But certainly the culture one is definitely something that all companies will be affected by. There needs to be that element of trust, where you trust your employees. If your employee says they were working, you've got mechanisms to track productivity, and it's now more output-based. There needs to be increased communication, because with staff now being more in more remote locations, to keep them informed and to keep them engaged, you need to communicate with them a lot more. Talent strategies are having to change. We've already received quite a few requests from corporates that say, can you come and assist us to look at how, we can update our talent strategies so that they are still effective, that our employees still feel that they've got growth in the business, and not have the anxiety of out of sight, out of mind. So there's quite a lot that companies need to think about. Obviously, from the office space perspective, some companies will now be decreasing the amount of space that they require, purely because they don't have a lot of workers in the office. So there's a lot of decisions that companies have to make.
Manqoba, thank you so much. Manqoba Zungu is the CEO of GetReadySkills organization, talking to us about a webinar that they held yesterday discussing how the workplace is likely to change after COVID-19. And very, very interesting. And it is, of course, a time to take a good, hard look at where you're at, what your skill set is, and how you can perhaps bring yourself, albeit kicking and screaming, into the current 4IR situation. We're going to take your calls after this break. 011-714-5861. You want to respond to the question of the